Hello, listeners. It is another beautiful Friday evening. Hope you had a great week thus far. Today is the second episode of our new program series, Agricultural Productivity and Inclusive Economic Growth on Amalgate Radio Communications. I remain your host, Titilola Ogunsona. Last week, which happens to be the maiden episode, we started by laying some context on agricultural productivity. We mentioned that agricultural productivity is the ratio of agricultural output to input in an economy. The agricultural productivity measures the rate of efficiency in an agricultural production system in a country or nation. Likewise, we went further to consider various examples and we went into more details on agricultural productivity. Today, we'll be laying the foundation of another important part of this program series. We said the theme is agricultural productivity and inclusive economic growth. So before we go further to talk about the relationship between agricultural productivity and inclusive economic growth, looking at the role agricultural productivity would play in achieving inclusive economic growth, today we are going to be laying the foundation to look at what inclusive economic growth means. What does it entail? How do we measure inclusive economic growth? How would we quantify inclusive economic growth in a nation or in an economy? For nearly 8 decades, the GDP, the gross domestic product, has been the go-to measure of prosperity for nations, for countries, for societies. When back in the day, when you measure the level of economic prosperity, the go-to measure had been GDP. However, data has revealed that higher or increased economic output doesn't guarantee shared benefit or sustainable growth. So if this is the case, what data is saying, what data is showing us, it thus becomes pertinent to look at this concept of inclusive economic growth more closely. Like I said earlier, it brings us to answer the first question: what then is inclusive economic growth? For starters, we can't even talk about inclusive economic growth without understanding the basics of economic growth. And economic growth can be defined as an increase in the production of goods and services in an economy over a given period of time, usually a year. So you're looking at the fact that an economy has increased the production of goods, has increased provision of services, and it has to be sustained rise, over a period of time. So when a nation is experiencing increase, sustained rise, in production capabilities, in providing of services, we can say such a nation is experiencing economic growth. And one of the measures of economic growth is one of the popular measures actually is the GDP, the gross domestic product, which speaks to the monetary measure. It's all about what, not the monetary measure, but the final goods and services produced in an economy in a given period of time, usually a year. So why are we saying inclusive? From the definition that it's possible for you to experience economic growth and not experience inclusive economic growth. So what makes it inclusive? So we'll be looking at various definitions by various scholars, various schools of thought, what it means for an economic growth to be inclusive in a society, in a country, in a nation. So according to Inclusive Growth Network, the definition of inclusive economic growth, entails economic growth that delivers social benefits, tackles inequalities, and spreads benefits more fairly between people and places. I'm going to break it down. So it's possible for you to have economic growth and not for it not to be inclusive. So economic growth that is termed to be inclusive must deliver social benefit to the people, must tackle inequalities. In fact, one of the macroeconomic objectives of government is to achieve equal distribution of income. In other words, reduce the rates of income inequality, so the barest minimum in an economy. So and it means that if you are going to achieve low level of income inequalities, even social inequalities in an economy, you must find an optimum way of allocation of resources so that benefits are spread evenly among the people, irrespective of family background, irrespective of gender, income bracket, and also places. So some people are not marginalized in a particular region or in an economy. And from this definition, this acknowledges that the traditional model of economic growth of the grow now, we distribute later, will not work. So as you are growing, you are thinking of how do you allocate these resources efficiently. Another definition by the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development, OECD, view inclusive growth as an economic development that creates opportunities for all socio-economic groups of the population and is able to distribute the monetary and non-monetary growth fairly across a society. If you look at this definition by OECD, one thing that is clear is that it's talking about the impact of economic development on the improvement of the standard of living of all population groups in the society. If we are growing, if an economy is developed, what is the impact of it on everyone in the economy? Is it fairly distributed? Do we have people that are largely marginalized? Do we have people that are not feeling the gains of economic growth or development in a particular society? So from these definitions, you realize that the focus of inclusive growth is actually creating a level playing field. You want a society where the future of people or its citizens is not predetermined or predestinated by the background, not about the family background, the income bracket of the family. Rather, it should largely be dependent on their talent, their skills, their effort in terms of hard work. In other words, inclusive economic growth is building a society where success is largely determined by one's abilities in terms of one's talent, in terms of one's skills, in terms of your behavioral competencies, hard work, resilience, determination, tenacity, your focus for growth, for success, and not limited by one's family background. I studied a report from International Monetary Fund, and some questions just popped up. And one of the questions that would ask, if you're talking about inclusive economic growth, building a society where for instance, the country where individuals are not, your future would not be determined by your family background, rather by your skills, your ability, your behavioral competencies, your strengths, and the environment just not helps, so that you can attain your potential, the full once you put in the hard work. Now the question that comes to mind would now be, how do we create a more equal society without having to sacrifice economic freedom or wealth? In economics, we talk about trade-offs. So in order to achieve, an inclusive economic growth in a nation, in a society, sometimes the tendency is you might have to sacrifice a bit of economic freedom or wealth. So the trade-offs comes in. What are we trading off for achieving inclusive economic growth? And these are things we'll still look on further. And again, another question you could now look at again is, when we're talking about inclusive economic growth, are you talking about creating equal opportunities, or will the focus be on equal outcomes for everyone in an economy? According to the IMF, when you talk about inclusive economic growth, you are talking a situation where a nation seeks to boost national wealth and well-being. You look at those two concepts, you are boosting, seeking to improve, increase, expand national wealth, and also the well-being of your citizens. Okay, and in achieving this, there's some key things you want to focus on. One, you want to talk about reducing poverty, boosting this by also reducing poverty level. We want to ensure equity across generations, from a particular generation to another, and we want to preserve economic freedoms. Okay, I earlier mentioned that sometimes you might have to trade off, but in order for you to achieve, talk about the well-being of the people should be prioritized, and of course national health as well should be prioritized. Okay, so when you talk about inclusive growth, you are looking at a way to reduce poverty. And my last program, the last quarter, okay, we looked at fiscal interventions and economic growth, and we said that when government seeks to achieve macroeconomic objectives, there are two major tools for government. Is that they use the fiscal tools, all the monetary tools. And in terms of the fiscal tools, we look at tax, we look at expenditure. Now let's even look at this. If we want to reduce poverty in the nation or reduce the level of inequality in the nation, one of the fiscal tools or interventions that government could deploy is taxation. Okay, so you want to say, okay, if that's the case, we want to reduce poverty in the land, let us tax the rich. Let's increase the taxes for the upper class, the rich in the society. Now there have been divergent opinions on using this, because yes, you want to reduce poverty, you want to introduce progressive tax, you want to say, okay, the higher you earn, the higher your level of your tax rate, or you want to even focus on the very rich and you're taxing that income. Okay, I want to increase that. But the twist side to it for some other scholars is that once you increase the tax of the rich, it could discourage investment. Okay, when the tax is high, it could discourage investment, it could discourage expansion of businesses, and once that happens, you have multiplier effect. It means that the reduction in employment levels, and when there's a reduction in employment levels, the reduction in production capabilities, and when that happens, it reduces the level of economic growth in the economy. Okay, so you see that it's a lot about finding a balance in achieving inclusive economic growth in an economy, and that the various measures, various policies that can be deployed to achieve this. So as we go on further, like I said, today is about laying the foundation for what inclusive economic growth or inclusive growth is all about. And of course, we talk about ensuring equality. Okay, and a lot of issues would also come under this. For inclusive growth to even happen in an economy, there must be growth that would be sustainable in the long run. And this growth must be broad-based across all sectors and inclusive of a large part of a country's workforce. That is important. And another school of thought also believes that economic growth has to be inclusive, and thus inclusive growth requires both extensive growth and intensive growth. I'll take it again, that inclusive growth requires two elements. It has to grow extensively, extensive growth, and it has to go intensively, that is intensive growth. Okay, so there are two parts to it. Okay, so if you have extensive growth, what does it mean? And if you say it has to grow intensely, what does it mean? So when you talk about extensive growth, is one that occurs when there's an increase in the amount of inputs. Okay, I've increased the amount of labor, the number of labor I'm deploying. I've increased my capital. Definitely, I'm expected to produce more because I've increased, the amount, the number, of my inputs. The amount of input has been increased. Okay, so it means extensive growth is actually based on quantitative increased input. Of course, naturally, once you increase the number of input, you should automatically increase the number of output. That's what extensive growth is. However, in contrast to that, okay, is where intensive growth takes place. Okay, intensive growth, we are looking at the productive use of your input. You are not increasing the number, but you are rather increasing the efficient use of the inputs. So for growth to take place, inclusive growth to take place, some schools of thought accept both as to occur, both extensive growth and intensive growth. So for example, in an economy, extensive growth, you are increasing, the pace and growth, of employment levels. There's an increase in the pace of growth in the economy. However, for this growth to be sustainable in the long run, so in the short run, you have increased, and of course, it's giving you more, higher output. But for it to be sustainable in the long run, it's not about increasing the amount or numbers, or however, it's for to ensure that employment, for instance, that we stated employment level, is for you to be optimally productive. So you can increase employment levels in an economy to increase level of income and economic growth in the short run. But however, in the long run, what happens later? They have to be optimally productive. All the larger percentage of your workforce must be deploying resources to increase economic growth. They have to operate at an optimal level. So thus, for employment levels to be optimally productive, there must be the presence of intensive growth. So it means that for employment level to grow intensively, it has to improve level of production. There must be technological advancement. There must be increase in innovation. So it's very important for inclusive growth to take place that we have both the extensive growth and intensive growth elements. According to the SDGF, that's Sustainable Development Goal Fund. Okay, when talking about inclusive economic growth, is also a situation where there is full respect for human rights and the well-being of the citizens are guaranteed. Yes, we can't overemphasize that from what we have seen from various definitions, from various schools of thought, it goes beyond productive capabilities. It goes to the well-being, to the standard of living, and this is also speaking to the respect for human rights of the citizens. Okay, so how can this be achieved? The first is that, of course, we talk about the creation of opportunities for good and decent jobs. We can't talk about inclusive growth if that you are not creating the environment, the opportunities for good and decent jobs for the citizens. Of course, this also goes in line with the Maslow's hierarchy, basic needs hierarchy. Okay, and of course, it's also important that we, for citizens, they have secured livelihood for everyone. Okay, no matter where you fall in terms of education, whether you are very educated to postgraduate level, or is still the high school certificate, there must be jobs, opportunities for everyone, every citizen to earn their living. To earn their living for livelihood. It's really important, because this would, what the effect of this is that once everyone who is willing and able to work can be self-reliant, can offer a service and earn money in return. This would help to reduce poverty level and, of course, level of inequality. And again, it's also important for us to achieve inclusive growth. You look at about achieving consistently and increasing value addition and productivity. You cannot just take it out. We can overemphasize the issue of value addition and high level of productivity, because you cannot even talk about inclusive economic growth if you are not even achieving economic growth. That's the basis, that's the foundation, that's the first step. Okay, and of course, value addition, that's where we are going to draw the linkage between this and agricultural productivity. So efficiency is important. We are going to look at the role that agricultural productivity would play in achieving inclusive economic growth for all. And a lot of factors that we're looking at. Now, in terms of achieving, increase in value addition and level of productivity in the economy, there are a lot of pillars, there are a lot of factors that has to be considered, that have to be implemented for it to take place. Of course, there must be efficient policies that will support the micro, small and medium enterprises, the firms, MSMEs. Of course there must be deliberate investment in development of skills for citizens in an economy, and then, of course, there must also be enabling environment for innovation and creativity. My colleague Titilola spoke a lot about innovation, and sometimes you see that we don't have the enabling environment, policies especially designed and efficiently implemented to foster innovation and creativity. So we can't really talk about inclusive economic growth if we do not put this in place. And of course, we can't take away the variety of products, quality of products, and there must definitely be adequate infrastructural facilities. When talking about innovation, I say, how will you get innovative and creative in an environment where you cannot even talk about constant power supply? I know that alternative sources, you have the solar and the likes of it, but is it affordable to everyone, especially in some climates, in some developing economies, around the globe? That's the question. So we have to talk about these pillars. These are pillars that are very important, that has to be looked into for us to also look at productivity. But this is important, inclusive growth, and of course the capital to achieving inclusive economic growth. You're also looking at having the right enabling business environment. It's a topic on its own. If I want to look at those, why business, ease of doing business, economic factors, look at political factors, look at security factors, electrical factors, legal factors. It's a whole lot, but it's multifaceted. In nature, there are going to be different aspects in order to achieve inclusive economic growth in an economy. Like I said earlier, it's important for us to lay the foundation, to let us know what inclusive economic growth entails, what's different definitions of it, how do we break it down so you understand that inclusive economic growth is not just economic growth, increasing productive capabilities in an economy, but it speaks to the welfare of the people, the standard of living of the people, the well-being of the people. We'll take a quick commercial break. I'll be right back. Please stay tuned.
Harmogate, founded in 2008 out of a desire to build transgenerational structures for organizations, institutions, and nations. We have worked with large businesses, international development organizations, and public sector ministries and agencies. Harmogate, our uniqueness is that we do not just work for you, we work with you. For example, we do not leave you to the task after sourcing talent that will help the new hire settle into robust leadership development programs. We are technical experts in advising and supporting institutions on strategy and leadership, artificial intelligence, strategic human resource management, public sector reform, finance, audit and tax, FAT, and strategic communications. We do all this and more out of a desire to transform nations through institutions and organizations. For further inquiries, email contact@thearmogate.org or call +234 810 999 6666, +234 807 957 4151, and +161 0504 6026. www.thearmogate.org. Armogate, building to endure and transforming nations through institutions and organizations.
Okay, if you're just joining us, thank you so much for joining. The program is Agricultural Productivity and inclusive economic growth. Yes, it's still Amogen Radio Communications, and I'm still Titilola Ogunsona. What we have done in the last couple of minutes is look at the concept more closely, what inclusive economic growth means. What does it mean in a nation? What does it mean in a country? What does it mean in a society? We also looked at what inclusive growth promotes. Okay, what does it seek to achieve? This is what we have looked at in the last couple of minutes. So in the last couple of minutes before we draw the curtain on this episode, I want us to look at the measurement of inclusive growth. How do we measure inclusive growth? Is that a quantitative approach to the measurement of level of inclusive economic growth in an economy? We know for economic growth, we look at the gross domestic product as a measure of economic growth. There are other measures of economic growth, or you want to look and so it depends on what time will permit us, but we should know that there will be various dashboards, indicators, or analytical approaches that will be deployed to measure inclusive growth or even elements of inclusive growth in an economy. Now I'll look at the first one. We have that of the ADP in 2014, which viewed inclusive growth as economic growth with equality of opportunity. And what they tried to look at was they came up with a set of 35 indicators majorly around poverty, looking at social inclusion, social safety, and governance. Again, we also have that of the European Commission 2010 strategy named Europe 2020, which define economic growth as support for the population through promotion of high employment rates, investment in acquisition of skills, tackling of poverty, and also modernization of the labor market. I think that's also a very good one here. However, we'll look more intensely, most closely at the one by United Nations Conference on Trade and Development. Okay, on TAD, they looked at they came up with an index, an inclusive growth index IGI. It was actually launched in 2022. Okay, and initially when this came under the UNCTAD and EEC 2019, they looked at 3 pillars of economic growth index, but however another fourth one was also added. So we have 4 main pillars. Okay, that is the economy, pillar 1, the second pillar, living conditions of the people, 3, the third pillar, equality, and the fourth pillar, environment. Okay, and what this IGI, that's the inclusive growth index, okay, by the UNCTAD, what they try to look at is to measure a nation's economic well-being and level of inclusivity across 4 categories, or what we call the 4 pillars. That is the economy, living conditions, equality, and environment. So you're talking about the well-being, of course I said the basis is even the economy, the GDP, the quality, and the environment, living conditions of the people. And what they try to do was to come up with a total of 27 indicators, and these 27 indicators were organized in these 4 pillars, and this is a bit different from the set of 35 indicators around poverty, social inclusion, social safety, and governance that ADP 2014 came up with. So we have a total of 27 indicators. Under the first pillar, that's the economic, we have about 5 indicators here. We have the GDP, the gross domestic product. We have national income. It also looks at power consumption, looks at employment, and of course, last but not least, looked at trade. Okay, so we talked these economic indicators also refer to the traditional economic indicators. So we have 5 indicators on that economy. That's the pillar 1. So let's look at the second pillar, which speaks to the living conditions. Which of the indicators do we have here? The second pillar looks at indicators like what is the social and health conditions of the people, looking at the logistics and finance in the economy. Of course, it speaks to the under 5 mortality rate. You're also looking at the school enrollment of students. We are looking at coverage of essential health services, and of course, percentage of people using safely managed drinking water services. Okay, I don't think that's a report I saw. I think that's of 2020 or 22. Okay, I would I don't know. Time will not permit us to take that on this episode. We'll look at it maybe next week. Okay, let's look at the third pillar. The third pillar of equality. It measures level of equality using indicators as income concentration ratio. We're looking at gender parity in school enrollment, looking at the ratio of female to male enrollment rates, difference in finance, to male labor force participation. Looking at the difference in female to male labor force participation rate. Those are the indicators under pillar 3 of equality. Okay, and the last but not the least, the pillar 4, environment. This pillar focuses on national capital protection and also energy intensity. So we have indicators that the carbon dioxide emission, efficiency of waste use, and also looking at percentage of protected areas. Wow, this is all I can take on the second episode of our new program series. I enjoyed being here. Thank you so much for tuning in. You are the reason why we do this every day. Please, if you want to know more about us, kindly check us on our website www.thearmorgate.org. We have our social media handles, and you check it's Armorgate on LinkedIn, Armorgate on Instagram, Armorgate on Facebook. And if you have consulting needs, training needs, communication needs, we are here to have you covered. You are the reason why we do this every time, like we like to say. So please, if you have any questions, you have any feedback for us, any area you want us to touch, the mail still remains contact@thearmorgate.org. And also remember to join my colleagues. They've also started very interesting, insightful, explosive programs for the last quarter of 2025. It still runs Monday through Fridays, and the time remains 5 p.m. WAT. And I would definitely not leave without dropping my quote. I saw, and I like this quote when I saw it, is that economic growth must be accompanied by 4 components. Okay, the people, prioritization of social welfare, sustainability of the environment, and community resilience. This is all I have for you today. Do have a beautiful weekend. I remain Titilola Ogunsona, saying bye from here till I find my way to your devices again next Friday, 5 p.m. WAT. Stay blessed.